Welcome to the Power Panel podcast, a show where we follow the leadership journeys of exceptional African women at the helm of public service and civil society. Our question is, how do African women lead and deploy power? I am your host, Ambassador Rachel Omamo, a senior counsel, diplomat and former cabinet minister in Kenya. It is the 1970s in a quiet village in the Kenyan highlands of Embu. The sun is breaking through the early morning mist and the birds are in song. A 5-year-old girl, fondly known as Kanini, the tiny one, the 6th child in her family, is walking happily, milk pail in hand, towards the home of her immediate neighbor. As she arrives, she stops and stares in awe at the majestic house before her. A powerful cabinet minister lives here.
As I grew up, the immediate neighbor to my parents was a very influential man who was, at the point that I was born, actually a cabinet minister in the government of Kenya. And, as the differences were so stark between my humble family and the family of my neighborhood, I was very exposed to seeing what power meant at a very early age, because we would buy some of the basic necessities, including milk, from this influential family. And so every time I was asked to go and fetch milk, which I loved to do because then I would have a glimpse onto a TV screen, I found myself dreaming at an age of 5 years and saying to myself, why should it be that, you can have these extremes in terms of living well and not living well? But on the other hand, how is it that you can have so much? But importantly, how is it that I can also get myself to that position or near that position?
Decades later, this determined girl, known to us as Sicily Kariuki, becomes a cabinet minister herself.
Kenya's Agriculture Principal Secretary Sicily Kariuki.
The Health Cabinet Secretary Sicily Kariuki.
Sicily Kariuki is the Cabinet Secretary for Water, Sanitation and Irrigation.
It is a season for women leaders in the public sector.
She is sworn into office in 2015, having ascended the ranks of public service in Kenya. It has taken unwavering focus and resilience from Sicily to become who she is. Sicily was kind enough to join me for a telephone interview. From this in-depth conversation, we bring you this story, examining her journey, traveling from childhood to the present, while taking stock of key lessons along the way.
I grew up to very loving parents, very humble, extremely hardworking, serious in discipline, but also serious in giving their children, 7 of us, a life better than what it is they had lived through, hadn't been privileged to go to school. And so my father, my mother knew that education would be an equalizer for generations coming after their generation. And therefore, I grew up, within a family that knew we had to work hard if we had to amount to anything. I grew up in a family where my parents believed, whether born girl or boy, we are all equal before them and before the community. We grew up knowing that family and family values of being cohesive, respect would count for much. I grew up in a family that was strong in the Christian faith.
Young Sicily is nurtured in a family setting abundant with strong parental support and sibling guidance, laying a strong foundation for what is to come.
Giving credit to my parents because they helped me to stay the course is also important to say that I had role models right at home. My two elder sisters had acquired basic education and gone beyond. One of them was one of the first ladies to acquire a university degree from the Sleepy Village, from a humble home. And my other sister also had gone all the way to become primary school teacher. My elder brother, three of them were reasonably doing okay vis-a-vis the background that we had, and all of them had formal employment, and therefore I had them right there. And every time I appeared not to toe the line and be a little bit cheeky, then I had a lot of people to pinch my cheeks and, get me to be orderly.
Sicily was focused from an early age and set very high standards for herself. She describes a defining moment during her high school years when she chose to retake her A-level exams, although she had scored good marks.
Having missed university entry grade by only 1 mark, I must say I had done well. But something in me said I was cut out for something better than a diploma in teaching. I didn't wish to be a teacher for a career, that I knew. And number two, I knew that I didn't put my best foot forward to be able to get the grades which I think I was made for. And therefore, with encouragement from my sister, who was already through university at that point in time and who knew that my potential was way beyond the grade that I had gotten, I was convinced that I needed to be able to, lay a proper foundation for the kind of career which I had wanted for myself. My parents initially had a problem because they thought, you have done well. Going back again means that you're taking resources which we are supposed to be putting to the girl who follows you in terms of school, and therefore just you proceed because you've done well. So, but it didn't matter that my parents didn't agree with me at that point in time, vis-a-vis the clarity that I had in terms of where I wanted to position myself in life. It meant to me that you need it, you claim it, you go for it, is the only path that I was going to follow in life.
Sicily salvages her dream of going to university by performing very well in her second attempt at her A-levels. Whilst awaiting admission to the University of Nairobi, Sicily seeks employment as an untrained teacher in 2 local secondary schools. There, she has an early encounter with the vagaries of leadership for the first time.
So, transition between sitting the A-level exam and going to university. Back then, there was a 2 years rule, because I think the university calendar had been disrupted out of an attempted coup previously. And therefore, most of us would necessarily go into teaching as untrained teachers, because again, there was also a shortage of teachers in the country. And so I ended up in a boys' school, which is one of the best performing, including now. And I was rated to be a senior teacher, because then I was given form 3s and 4, which is the more senior. But I didn't understand why, the boys that I found there wouldn't be too serious about their education. Most of them, given that, the only constant I knew was to be serious about education, even when you don't get your grades. But I found, young men who are not too serious, and it didn't go too well with me, because I believe for them to change their life in the future was exactly what my parents had told me. They needed to be serious at what they do. And so for a short time, I got into a tiff, and there was a strike because they thought this is a very young lady, she's untrained. And, she's really pushing us, with a lot of homework, so I found myself in a very lonely place, because then, I wasn't able to influence them to the extent that I thought I would.
Dejected but unbowed, Sicily finds another teaching placement in a new girls' secondary school. Her experience there is totally different in that it is uplifting. In fact, Sicily becomes a headmistress at the age of 21.
I was very privileged that there was a girls' school being started in Embu district, and I was called to go and set up the foundation. And it was not just a challenge, but it is one that when I look back, I don't believe that I actually made it. I was interviewed by the board and I was taken on to be the founder teacher as the headmistress. And with me were three ladies who were recruited with me. And so four of us, we set up the foundation. That is when I knew the place of role models and mentors and getting people that you can constantly keep referring to when you're not very sure how things are going. But to me, that kind of gave me a foundation and a conviction that perhaps leading isn't so mythical. I started off with about slightly less than 30 girls. I mean, I hadn't been to any administrative kind of training or I hadn't been given any induction, but I was able to get through. You'll be surprised that I went back to the school. It is now 300 plus girls and boys, and we had a good time. Over 30 years later, dancing around, as their founder, headmistress. So that was my first real interaction with formal leadership, the setting of it and what it meant. It meant many things for me, but I'll single out only three. It means that you have to be completely dedicated to any assignment that comes your way. It meant that you had to be confident, even when you went to meetings with other teachers. You needed to show up as if you have an idea, never mind you look so tiny and they don't know whether you're actually the student or the teacher. But it also meant for me the place of role modeling in leadership can never be taken away. I had to refer to my counterpart who was the headmaster of the primary school. Never mind, he hadn't been to university, but he was very, very useful to me.
Looking closely at these two leadership assignments, it is evident that contextual factors such as patriarchy affect Sicily's leadership style and determine her effectiveness.
In the boys' school, you will recall that I said it was an established school, and therefore the teachers, the principal, and everybody were reasonably mature, mostly men, and I would have passed to be their daughter, for example. The student population, given the location of the school, was also very mature boys. Effectively, a lot of the ones that I taught were actually older than I was. And so the stereotyping, the patriarchal mannerisms began showing up very, very quickly in that environment. The girls' school, I was a founder head teacher, and therefore I was starting from zero. Remember, it was a girls' school. Remember, I was just an older girl, and therefore we kind of could synchronize things and I could be listened to more easily. Remember also, this was Form 1 that I was setting up. In the high school, I was started off with Form 3 and Form 4, who were more mature. And yes, and of course, the experience I had in the boys' school also made some lessons for me when I went to the girls' school, which I applied quite well in terms of consultations. I was more conservative. I was more like, if this fails and it's in my hands, what will I have to say? The other place, there were structures, there was a principal, there were teachers. The final responsibility was not on my shoulders, and therefore, I was just one of them.
At our first signpost in Sicily's journey, we can distill two leadership insights. First, it is important to set ambitious goals and to take consistent action to attain them. Second, you must adapt your leadership style to suit your environment. Sicily is a young woman eager to establish herself in the world. Within weeks of graduating from university, she secures a job at the Investment Promotion Center, a government parastatal, heralding the beginning of her long career in the public sector in Kenya. She then briefly transitions to the private sector by joining the Fresh Produce Exporters Association of Kenya, an influential members guild in Kenya's booming horticultural sector. Here, she becomes the CEO at the age of 36. At this stage, having experienced the leadership and governance cultures in the private and public sectors in Kenya, Sicily reflects on the differences she discerns.
The private sector membership organization was reasonably small in my days, and the governance template, controls, oversight was a lot tighter, was actually very, very tight, if you will, because the members, 100 of them, required to know how the last cents had been spent and whether it fell within the agreed upon activities. You know that in the public sector, there is a little bit of some lackluster behavior when it comes to managing, especially financial resources on behalf of the public. And so what that did for me was to teach me that every cent that got into my hands had to be utilized as had been planned and programmed and agreed upon, and report without being asked to do so. So there was very strict learning in terms of governance and that whole accountability thing in the private sector. The second difference was that my salary was very, very meager, and that of the team I worked with, and that if we had to get any other financial reward, we had to work for it, and there had to be commensurate growth in the business for you then to get a bonus or additional resources. It then meant you actually work for what it is you earn or what you take home. The public sector is somewhat different. You know, you're on a salary and parts whether you work, whether you didn't go to work half the month, whether the work you did was substandard, and that was a real contrast. And the third one, which I would want to point out, is that the sustainability of the business or any business in the private sector, including the one I headed, was subject to how well you performed, because there was donor funding coming, membership resources coming in, and it meant for us to go on to the next year and into the fifth year and make these operations a going concern. You had to work for it, and there had to be tangible growth that was equal to either additional earnings from the export market or expansion in terms of the area that farmers had planted their staff on. The opposite is true for this other side, because here the public who cannot hold you directly accountable in a lot of ways. And number two, whether or not you work very hard, it really doesn't matter. Government is a going concern. And, you know, the mindset of a going concern doesn't lend itself to serious, impactful work.
Notwithstanding her misgivings about the public sector, Sicily applies for the role of Managing Director at the Tea Board of Kenya. It is a parastatal charged with regulating the tea sector and enhancing its exports.
I had outgrown the membership organization, which was confined to membership, and therefore my impact was restricted, and I think I had reached the ceiling. So I needed to also grow as a person. Number two, I needed to take the lessons that I had taken out of the private sector to the public sector and to confirm that it can also be done neatly, that people can actually work for impact, and that accountability still would count, and that it can also find space in the public sector. And so my motivation was to lay a governance template that would confirm to the world out there that not every public institution is what everybody thinks, that it is a den of corruption, that it is a den of lackluster work, it is a place where people don't care. And that was also part of my motivation. Number 3, and perhaps not very important, but it came to pass, was that I also needed to confirm to the world and Kenya in particular that it is a season for women leaders in the public sector. Recall, I was the first CEO of this parastatal, which had been there from the 50s. I was the first female CEO.
Self-discovery is an ongoing process for all leaders, including Sicily. During this phase in her career, she recognizes how her strengths have evolved.
I seem to have actually been progressing on the path and the values that I inherited from my parents, one of which was accountability and integrity. You know, it's something I lived with through whether I was in the public sector or private sector, because then if it's not yours, forget about it. You know, don't get stuff that's not yours. Whether it is you're minding it on behalf of the public or on behalf of the members, it's not yours. The second one that I learned and picked, it still rotates around commitment to work, duty, and hard work. Working as if nobody is watching you, because you know at the end of the day, God is watching you. And you owe it to God, even if people cannot see what it is you're doing. So work hard the minute that you'll be given an opportunity to work hard. Number 3, and perhaps the final one in terms of my leadership learning journey, is that finally, it's all about people. Finally, it's all about people. If people trust you, they're going to allow you to keep growing. They're going to support you to keep growing. If people trust you, they are going to follow you. If people trust you, they'll give you the next opportunity. If people believe that you have a vision and are making a difference to them, they will actually be alongside you, whether you're holding a high office and you seem to be entitled and unreachable. They will treat you as well as they would if you came tumbling down. So it's all about people at the end of the day.
At the tea board, Sicily consolidates and leverages her lobbying and networking skills. She firmly secures a place for herself in powerful circles.
Joining us now to talk us through the prospects of just one component of the sector is Sicily Kariuki. She's the CEO of the Tea Board of Kenya and joins us now live from our studios in Nairobi, Kenya.
The Tea Board of Kenya seemed to be a place where the public got to associate and know much about me, because then I would be in the media speaking about a very critical sector at a point that, you know, was really growing and carrying 500,000 farmers plus. But 5 years before that, when I was a CEO of Fresh Produce Exporters Association of Kenya, I was privileged to also be in most of the most influential government delegations to look for export markets for fresh produce. And therefore, I was kind of exposed to these men and women that you speak about wielding power. But before that, you will also recall when I joined my first job after university, I had a docket that I headed for about 2 years, as a promotion manager. And what that meant for me is that I was in the international market looking for foreign investors, staging investment meetings and events which were graced by the then president of Kenya and the ministers of trade at a very, very young age. And I didn't shy away from, rubbing shoulders and asking for their opinion. They can trust you to lead a delegation, to lead a certain stream when you're in the markets, international markets. And therefore, naturally, I was exposed to that and forever grateful. It was the nature perhaps of the job that I had, but it was also the confidence that I had built over time. And I had learned at a very early age through attending courses that were, propagating female leadership in the country, that I had learned as a woman, you must, stand up to be counted. It will not be given to you if you're not there. So I knew to ask. Then you remember 20, 30 years ago, most of the decision makers were men, really, very few women. I learned very early that for me to be able to influence in terms of the profession and the targets I had set for me by the board, I needed to be available. So it became almost a natural. I didn't limit myself.
Sicily thrives at the tea board. She grows in confidence and leadership. It proves to be a watershed moment, and she explains why.
It was, the largest single sector within our group during my days, and forever grateful because I actually enjoyed my 8 years in T-board, from a very nascent, very, docile, very quiet corner, little office in the Gureti corner to, a global mover that was able to see the sector go to 113 billion shillings from 46 billion when I took over the sector. And I did develop friends, partners, allies that even today have come to be my friends professionally and otherwise. And I must also say, I enjoyed a lot of support from the government sector then, never mind we were a parastate or not mainstream government. I had a wonderful, team of colleagues, most of who I recruited, because when I came to T-board, it was a very small organization and I had the privilege of recruiting a lot of the heads of department. And I wasn't shy to say that if I had a man and a woman, I would go for the lady, because then I needed to support the next woman for them to, to go to the space where I was. And a very trusting board, a board that actually, was both professional, but also gave me the latitude to make decisions. Again, back to the question of trust. My seniors in the ministry trusted me, but you earn trust. You earn trust because, one, you're bringing value to what it is they are doing. You earn trust because you're being honest, and when you give an opinion, even when it is not very positive, you're doing it because you're being honest. And I was very careful also to keep on growing in terms of my competence. So again, going back for short courses, going back to school, gave me bring or deliver the value for which my seniors were looking for.
However successful women become, the rigors of leadership remain burdensome, be they managing people, networking, work-life balance, leveraging power, or contending with cultural norms. What support system is available to Sicily?
I found myself in an absolutely male-dominated space all the time. And I had to make up my mind whether I was going to be available where they were and mitigate or manage the risks that would come with that, or I was going to be sufficiently okay being the wife of my husband and the mother of my children. But I did get incredible support from my husband, which half the time actually inhibits the growth of women, especially when you're trying to balance family and career. And I got an incredible amount of support and encouragement. And every time I would have a job that was very stressful, he would be there to kind of help me manage the other things. But he would encourage me to keep going. Just keep going kind of thing. So from my father encouraging me not to look at myself just as a girl, I found a spouse who believed in me and my career growth, and that also was helpful.
As we take this short power break, we ask that you subscribe to the Power Panel podcast. Let's work together to expand the Power Panel community. Visit our website, birdsongafrica.com, and follow us on social media to plug into the Power Panel network. Email your thoughts to hello@birdsongafrica.com. When we return, we unveil the next stage of this journey. This is the Power Panel Podcast. Supported by her husband and family, glowing in her achievements at the tea board, Sicily sets her focus on new possibilities. She applies for a prestigious government role as Principal Secretary, commonly referred to as PS in Kenya, and as Permanent Secretary or Director General in other countries.
Life is a journey and you have to be ambitious to keep growing. So I took every step of my professional journey as a growth, because when you come from being a CEO of the tea board, you're actually confined to one sector. Therefore, moving forward to apply to be a PS was because I felt like my life cycle, which is normally 5 to 8 years, I had kind of exercised any innovation and creativity that I had. I had put on the governance frameworks in place. I had done the reforms which I had noted needed to be done with the support of the government, and that I had grown also in terms of my people and managerial skills, and I needed to deploy these to a bigger space.
Sicily succeeds. She is appointed as Principal Secretary in the Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock and Fisheries in June of 2013. This appointment changes what leadership means to Sicily. She confronts the true nature of political power.
I moved to the PS role, which I deliberately did because for you to apply, to go through the shortlisting, to be interviewed by Parliament, and finally for the President to appoint you, it is a very deliberate journey. And it was deliberate for me because of two things. One, I knew that I had outgrown the safety net of the tea board, and therefore I needed to take a new challenge. And number two, I knew that I wanted to be part of a government that was headed by an energetic, young, determined president who was keen to change the lives of Kenyans. Shifting from tea board, which was a more secure space, and coming to be the PS in agriculture was not only defining, but actually it is where my leadership values and capabilities were tested. And this is where I had the real brush with power, politics, and leadership. This is where leadership started for me, I must say. Real leadership, when you look at it in all ways. And therefore, my character was tested. My competencies were completely tested. My commitment, what I consider the 3 C's of real leadership, this is where the test started.
The position of Principal Secretary is onerous and perilous. It is a constitutional post in which the holder functions as the accounting officer. The PS oversees all financial expenditure at the ministry and is in charge of all administrative functions, as well as being the chief advisor to the minister. In this role, what leadership challenges does Sicily encounter?
So I must say that the tea board space, being a safe space, prepared me well. What tea board didn't prepare me well to do is to balance between power, politics, and leadership. Because, I was under the safety net of a PS and a board when I was running the parastatal as a head. What I didn't know, or that which none of us goes to school to be taught, is how you manage and balance the relationships on account of people who are coming to you because they are pure politicians and therefore they want to be treated as politicians, people who are coming to you because purely they mean well for what it is you are doing, and therefore they are genuine leaders, and people that are just drunk with power. That balance is what nobody will ever teach you, and therefore it becomes very risky, particularly when you're running the kind of budgets that I found myself running with as an accounting officer for the PS of agriculture. And you will recall I was the first year I was the accounting officer for my own department, that is agriculture. I was the accounting officer temporarily for Department of Fisheries under the same ministry, and also the accounting officer for the Department of Livestock, which had fully fledged appointed PSs each. But I was called to handle the accounting, responsibility for the entire ministry. That can be risky. And that put me at loggerheads with a lot of, with some of my colleagues once in a while and their teams, because they didn't understand why. I didn't call for it, I didn't invite it, but it is what it is. It ended up being that, and it meant that I had to put in a lot of long hours for me to balance the risk and do the job that needed to be done, especially for the first year.
What tactics does she harness to navigate the risks before her?
I learned to even now use my intuition. At some point, I'll just go into myself and say, what is a small voice in me saying? In decision making, it's not a very objective thing. But, up to a point to keep saying I had to go to that. You need people who are even better endowed in terms of the knowledge that you require than you. And I need to surround myself with the best PA, for example, intelligent to understand the dynamics and the politics all at the same time. I had to get, an informal advisor from outside. I knew this is where when you make a mistake, then my life, career, and everything is finished. And therefore, I was on eggshells almost every day, but it took blood and sweat.
Leadership is perpetually shaped by unexpected events. In the midst of all this intensity, Sicily's presiding minister suddenly steps aside. She has to find a way to fill this temporary vacuum at the ministry. Her leadership and relationships are subjected to further pressure, but her profile is also elevated.
It meant that I was actually going to shoulder more work than a normal PS would. Remember, it was the second year as a PS. The first year, I shouldered more responsibilities than a normal PS did, because then I was doing this additional accounting work. So here I am again. The minister has stepped aside. After a couple of months, we have an acting minister who is running his substantive ministry, and therefore, again, he had to depend a lot on the PSs, the three of us. And I ended up doing work that normally I wouldn't do as a PS. I interacted a lot with power, and power here I mean the appointing authority. Normally, a PS would not necessarily be interacting routinely with the president. But I ended up having that very direct interaction with the appointing authority, the president, on two accounts, one on the issues accounting and issues strategic direction and vision of the ministry for a couple of months. I don't recall that it affected my relationship with the teams that I worked with at all. All I know is that I didn't have a life of my own, because I would be in Nairobi today and the following day I'm in Kampala to do something which was touching more. If the minister was there, that is a work that I would go to do. And I also know that it exposed me a lot to working with the then president, and therefore he was able to maybe appreciate what I stood for and the knowledge I had around the sector. Recall I had been in that sector for over 20 years. So, it was actually the key that opened the door for me to go to cabinet. I must say that window, in that pain, in that challenge, they always say there is an opportunity. So for me, the silver lining was that I had such exposure and keep growing on my path.
Now at our second signpost, We observe that leadership at high levels of government requires political dexterity, meaning the competence to craft a clear purpose, the ability to build trust, the willingness to be adaptable and alert, and finally, the artful skills of networking and negotiation. Sicily's competence as a PS does shine a light on her, and she receives the precious reward she dreamed of as a child. She's appointed a cabinet minister, becoming the first woman from Embu County to hold a ministerial post. It is a moving, jubilant, and proud moment for Sicily, her family, and the residents of the village where she was born. Between 2015 and 2022, Sicily holds 3 ministerial portfolios. First, Public Service, Youth and Gender. Secondly, Health. And thirdly, Water, Sanitation and Irrigation. However, the road ahead will prove to be arduous.
The Ministry of Public Service, Youth and Gender, a very, very troubled ministry at that point in time. As I got my brief in terms of what required to be done, I was almost very clear. Then my long experience in being an accounting officer perhaps would count for something, because, being an accounting officer as a PS and also as a CEO over the years meant to me in hindsight that I knew how to interrogate perhaps or review and ask the right questions when it came to issues of spending and whether resources were being applied to the right programs or interventions. That's what I view it to be. Number 2, over the years, because I had honed my skills of, building relationships and managing people, I also thought that would also play a role in that I would perhaps come out and be able to negotiate or convince the stakeholders to disarm themselves so that then you're able to begin on a new journey, especially when it came to matters of youth. There were a couple of commitments that the government had made, especially to the youth and women of this country. And it was those commitments that I needed to steady the ship quickly and be able to deliver. Given that we had another 2 years of the life of the administration at that point in time, and they needed to go back to the voters to be able to look for votes again. So they needed to fulfill the commitments. Again, easy for me. I was able to steady the ship. I was able to move forward, but not without another scandal walking through the door as I sat there as a cabinet minister. And it is at that point that then I knew it is important for the public to also be exposed to what is the role of who. The minister has a role of setting the strategic direction and designing policies to be able to fulfill the mandate of a particular ministry. The accounting officer, which roles I had held previously, also has a responsibility of minding the day-to-day appropriation of resources. And therefore, I had to get out and negotiate. Again, I tapped into my skills to negotiate, to be able to let the world know, what? We are the same and we are supposed to take political responsibility or right as a minister. But there is also a thin line between the division of labor, because nowhere can we work without a clear division of labor. And therefore, with my head high, I was so clear that I wasn't part or parcel to whatever was viewed to be another alleged scandal.
In the course of deploying her power as minister, Sicily earns the nicknames Thatcher, as in Margaret Thatcher, and Madam Close of Business, as in Madam COB. What does this say about the leadership style she adopted.
I didn't mind being called Thatcher because I think Thatcher has stood for many positive things in a very patriarchal kind of space. And she was known for defending how public resources were appropriated. And that is why I can relate and associate with her, because I am fully aware that the resources I've managed are not my resources, but I made sure they went to the programs that we agreed at the on upfront. And therefore I defended that. Number two, Thatcher was known to be not just loud, but to be very pushy, to be, you're gonna do it, you got to deliver, we've got to do that kind of thing. And, therefore, in the Ministry of Health, I didn't take it to be negative. I actually encouraged them to keep Thatcher, referring me to as Thatcher, because then it had another meaning. It means they knew what it is I stood for. COB was positive, really, to the extent that, I would say to my team, let me know what you need from me by COB, or let me have my report back by COB. So just again, being strict on, if we agreed you're going to deliver this at this point in time, let's be fair to the people that we are serving. When it came to challenging them to projects were taking too long to be completed, and there wasn't any good reason why that was the case. And so when I challenged them, that was when I moved to water in 2020. And I challenged my team of engineers and geologists, and I said, what is it that we need to do to complete a borehole and have water being utilized in the shortest time possible? And he agreed they were going to review the operational manuals that they were following, and they did. And I'm forever grateful. Anytime I challenge the teams I worked with respect, and they saw I was very consistent about what it is I believe to be right, and I coached them because I had an open door policy. They came along with solutions that they were never challenged previously.
What were the rewards of serving as a minister?
It was a balance of two things. One, just enjoying the privilege of being one of 22 out of the whole country is in itself a very, very satisfying and gratifying feat to have gone through. A lot of people will never live to be that, and therefore it gave me some internal level of self-actualization, so to speak. It gave me the sense of, whenever I looked at myself in the mirror, that I had been trusted, even in places where I didn't expect to be trusted. It gave me a chance to impact. It gives me hope for tomorrow, that if we could all, be in that position and make a little difference, I think the world will be a happier and better place for us to live in. When a woman calls me and says, I am in this business, next time pass through here, and I am here because when you are the Minister for Gender, you started this circle for us, and I saved money, and now I am having a big restaurant. I feel very, very happy about that.
On the other hand, what was the price?
The sacrifices that I had to make, including at the family front, are sacrifices that I will never be able to catch up with. I sacrificed it, went, like that. So a lot of that, I lost a lot of good friends then, because I wasn't even too available for them. Some of them, got into this situation, she's become too powerful, therefore she doesn't belong, kinda. So there is a price that I've had to pay. But importantly, the way the public takes you on when you're minister is very, very sad. And of course, I continue to pay the price of that. There is such a reputational risk, which I suffered myself, my family suffered, because when there was this scandal or that insinuation, my children would be looked at as having benefited. If they drove a car which looked like it was good, they benefited from, money that was not rightly gotten, while knowing that, every penny I can account for. But, that's a family, and they're exposed, and they'll forever be exposed, just like I will be exposed. But I quickly got to know that the minute you accept the call of leadership at those high levels, your mindset must shift to know that you will be misunderstood and people will accuse you. You will be criticized you become unreachable. You will be opposed even when you're saying the right thing. Importantly, you will even be rejected.
In view of the high personal cost, should women steer away from high public office?
Now, does that mean that we don't aspire to be in those spaces? We must aspire to be there. But a few lessons that I have picked is that as you move forward, as you move on, try and move with as many people as you can by keeping your networks alive and active to the extent that you can. Try and don't let the power be your torch. Don't let it get into your head. And I am very happy to say I manage very well. Don't also allow your values to be affected. Don't change your values, Sicily, and I have lived that and I have seen it. So that when it is time to pivot, it becomes a lot easier. Without networks, it becomes very, very difficult for you to come and start reestablishing. Without a family, because it's all been compromised, it becomes very difficult to pivot and come back and be yourself. Without community, I am able to go to the nearest supermarket without needing anybody with me. And I am just me. And I'm happy mingling with people there. In the village, I'm able to just go to the village and eat mandas with the villagers. At the end of the day, I did tell you it's about people. It's about people.
It has been suggested by a renowned political analyst and author that as minister, one has to be aware of 3 cognitive traps: bitterness, jealousy, and paranoia. What is Sicily's take on this from her own experience?
I never experienced any jealous around anybody because I was so very privileged that I had no business watching over the next minister and what they were doing. On bitterness, I didn't experience that. I had no reason to be bitter. Paranoia, yes, because it comes with the kind of exposure where you're dealing with people who have bad manners. What I call bad manners is what is referred to as cartels. People who want shortcuts, people who want status for maintain, people who are even inviting you to cut bills, right? When you say no, there could be meaning there. And therefore, you are so exposed, you are so vulnerable. So that I came across right from when I was a PS, right from when I was actually lower level, because then when you're a regulator and you're supposed to give licenses, you don't go dishing them out. I even recall some licenses which were given before I was there. So that means half the time you may be looking back and saying, am I saving this public space? Do I really want to go to the other space? Kind of. And the way our media works as well, you actually make news for no reason. I made news as a PS when I went to Sarit Center to shop. I love shopping. And going up to the till to pay for my, groceries. It was all news in media. So that space just confirms that you are supposed to remain lonely, and it works because then you are confined to somewhere hanging at the top alone. But what happens when you leave the cabinet office? You find everybody has shifted, you have moved. So again, the loneliness continues. So it is something, even when it shows up, you must be able to mitigate and manage, because at the end of the day, we are part of community.
During her service as cabinet minister, Sicily achieves significant milestones for the country. Notably, she oversees the design and national rollout of Kenya's first universal healthcare coverage pilot program. She also spearheads the establishment of the National Cancer Institute. In 2022, she resigns from her ministerial position to pivot into elective politics. She runs for the seat of Governor of Nyandarua County, but withdraws her candidacy at the primary stage.
I used the opportunity not to go to the end as a learning curve, and therefore I have new knowledge and skills around how to maneuver that phase now. So I guess that I will be better off.
Meanwhile, Sicily's second pivot is into executive coaching, drawing on her deep and impressive leadership expertise in public service. Through her company, Reimagine Impact Associates, she specializes in emotional intelligence training.
I have come to specialize in emotional intelligence practice. Again, using my own gaps. Had I been exposed to the concept of emotional intelligence, I perhaps would have made a better Thatcher than I did during my days.
After having grappled with power in high office, what advice would Sicily give to a young girl interested in one day rising to the helm of public service? What is her power mantra?
I will simply say to this girl that leadership, to me, is a rare opportunity to positively impact others. It is not about you. It is about the positive impact to the next person, particularly if the next person is vulnerable.
Sicily's story highlights that she is a woman who is focused, confident, and firm in her values. Throughout her career, she has been determined to deliver results and impact others. She has surmounted each hurdle in public service skillfully and is unafraid to pivot to new horizons. She is, without a doubt, the epitome of the indomitable public servant. I am grateful for the privilege of learning so much from Sicily Kariuki. Read more about Sicily in her memoir, Breaking the Illusions. We thank you most sincerely for listening and look forward to your company on our next episode. This is the Power Panel Podcast.